As I wrap up my remarks this afternoon, I'd like to stay on this subject for a moment. The cost of the Prime Minister to Canadians and how this relates to the current conversation and the current conflict in Europe. We are united in this House in saying that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was wrong. We are horrified by the violence. With one voice, we condemn the violence. We have stood with the people of Ukraine in the hour of need. Canada has provided some $10 billion worth of humanitarian, military, and direct financial support. That said, this Prime Minister, this government, have been consistent and unequivocal in saying that we will support Ukraine whatever it takes for as long as it takes. And I will say that concerns me a bit, and I've heard that concern from a growing number of my constituents. I think as a leader, when you make statements like that, Canadians deserve to know what that looks like. When the Prime Minister says whatever it takes for as long as it takes, what exactly does he mean? Ukraine is our friend. Russia's invasion was wrong. Still, Canada should have reasonable expectations and know what their government is committing them to and whom. I fear this government's woke excitement and alarmism blinds them to what really is important in a trade deal, but also when it comes to the basic democratic values that we expect of our friends and international partners. As my colleague from Yellowhead noted in his speech, Canada stands as a beacon of democracy and human rights on the world stage. When people buy Canadian, they are not just buying a product. They are buying into a set of values that respect human dignity, prioritize environmental sustainability, and advocate for peace. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and freedom of the press. These are things that matter. And they are under assault in Canada under this Prime Minister, and they are assault in Ukraine. Truth is, first casualty of war, and freedom quickly follows. Friends should always have each other's back, but sometimes we also need to sit down and have tough conversations. I recognize that's part of a larger conversation than one we're going to have here today. So, to wrap it up, Madam Speaker, Conservatives believe in supporting our Ukrainian friends, including through trade, but those costs need to be clearly defined to Canadians. We believe Canada should continue looking for ways to use our economic strengths to support the Ukrainian people, including by exporting Canadian LNG to break European dependence on natural gas from Russia. Conservatives are looking very carefully at this legislation. We're talking to those affected sectors. We'll work to ensure our trade and other international agreements are always in the interest of Canada and all Canadians. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Deputy House Leader has a question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, the problem with that last speech is that none of the facts back up what the member said. He said Conservatives stand with Ukraine. Well, then you'll have to explain to me why when President Zelensky came to this House, the Leader of the Opposition never once mentioned it on social media. As a matter of fact, as an act of subtle defiance, the member from Calgary Nose Hill had to go back a year ago to the last time Zelensky addressed this Parliament to quote tweet what he had said that time as though that's somehow justifying the fact that he had visited this time. But more importantly, to the red herring that he just pulled up about, oh, why do we need this now? I don't know, because Ukraine came to the table, sat down with Canada, made the deal, and now, Madam Speaker, the Ukrainian Council of Canada says that they strongly support strengthening the trade and economic ties between Canada and Ukraine. Canada and Ukraine have negotiated this treaty. We call on all parties to support the swift adoption and implementation. Does this member know better about this issue than the Ukrainian Council of Canada?
Honourable Member for Provencher.
Well, he was doing so good till that last line.
Couldn't even get the name right.
Madam Speaker, of course Canadians know that Conservatives support Ukraine. We've demonstrated that through our support of the help and the aid that we've provided through Ukraine in the last year and a half. That our support is unequivocal for Ukraine. Conservatives are prudent, and we like to know what the cost is before we make big commitments. And so that's really all we're asking of this government to, for once in its history, provide Conservatives, provide this House, provide Canadians with what the cost of what you're saying is going to be. There needs to be transparency, and that's something sorely lacking from this Liberal NDP government.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Esquimalt Shannock-Sooke.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And of course, I'm very much a supporter of free trade with Ukraine and anything else we can do to help a democracy stand up against an invasion of their territory. But I'm a little concerned by the Conservatives saying their support for Ukraine is unequivocal and then saying, but it has limits. We seem concerned about the cost. So it seems to be a bit of a contradiction there in the speech, saying unequivocal support and then saying, but we have to know how much it costs before that support is unequivocal. So I know that the government and New Democrats certainly stand with Ukraine, and we don't want to offer any hope to Russia that we're somehow going to abandon Ukraine, which I'm afraid the member's speech did toward the end.
Honourable member for Provost.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my friend from the NDP for that question. It's a good question, because it would appear as though perhaps there's an inconsistency in our position. There isn't. Conservatives support Ukraine. We negotiated the first free trade agreement. We support free trade. There is currently a free trade agreement in place. It works. There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, if anything, it's actually in favor of Ukraine.
Yes.
And that was negotiated intentionally to help a fledgling company in their pursuit of democracy and freedom and the rights of humans and the furtherance of democracy. So do we want to know what the cost is? Absolutely. We don't just blindly rush into things like national pharmacare and free dental for everybody without wanting to know the cost.
Questions and comments, the honourable member for Nepean.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we, at the International Trade Committee, we had the Ukrainian ambassador, and we had very good interactions with her. She emphasized the Ukraine's desire to see this legislation go through. She emphasized the importance of this legislation, specifically touching upon the huge infrastructure that has been damaged, costing about $400 billion. She also emphasized we need to get ready now so that Canada be a partner in rebuilding of Ukraine. And she explained the last year, the Ukraine Rebuilding Conference that was held in Canada, which was overcrowded by Canadian companies and Ukrainian companies, getting ready for the war to get over and to rebuild Ukraine. So I would like to have the honourable members' comments on that.
Member for Provencher, 25 seconds.
Okay, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm not sure what the question was in that comment, but Canada too, and Conservatives, from a Conservative position, we stand eager to help Ukraine in their rebuilding. And we know that a free trade agreement is going to be part of that, so that it will enable us to supply them with what they need to regain their position as the breadbasket of Europe. They've got tremendous agricultural assets that we can leverage here from Canada. We've got the expertise, we've got equipment manufacturing, and we're going to be very willing and eager to stand with them in their rebuilding process.